Just a couple weekends ago, I ran a Game AI event with Game Dev TV. If you missed that, the video for that's probably going to be available, I don't know, sometime maybe next month. Don't know. I'll share a link when that's available if you want to check it out. But the one of the questions that came up near the end, we kind of anticipated, was about ChatGPT, generative AI, and the relationship of that to stuff going on. Now, that was not the focus of the conference, right? The day-long event that I ran, the workshop. That was more about gameplay AI, characters, and navigation, and Pac-Man Ghosts, and fighting games, and FPS, and waypoints, and A-Star, and those kind of uses of AI. But, again, I know it's on everyone's mind right now what's going on with AI in terms of generating coding, because a lot of you are thinking about, do I still have a future as an engineer? Is programming still a relevant career skill? What is going on there? So let me just talk through a few different things going on here. One, I want to acknowledge that, so basically, there is some experimentation happening within Home Team, within the people that I oversee at any given time, looking at maybe 5 to 15 projects that I oversee, just people practicing together. And I'm not encouraging it, I'm not forcing it, I'm not telling people to use it, but also the difference of why I'm sort of at the forefront of some what's going on there is that I'm also not restricting it. I'm not in an academic institution. I don't have the same slow structures that drag behind sometimes what people can be trying or doing. People are building projects, and so they're using what they can to build projects in the same way that they historically have Google searched or browsed Stack Overflow or asked a question online. They are now also trying out just to see, in some cases, can they get a useful bit of code out of it. Now, if you're unfamiliar with it at a high level, I'm going to walk you through kind of a little micro example here, just to show you some of the stuff that it does, so you have some context here. If you've not seen it being used, and let me clarify, this is going to be using ChatGPT 3. 4, which you might have already seen some posting about, is more advanced, but is already sort of being deployed now for paid people. But 3 is already going to kind of illustrate our points that we're after. So what we see here, this is ChatGPT 3. This is the free tier. I'm not doing the plus or that, which again, will give me 4.0. But I just want to show some examples here of the kind of things that people are doing. So different things can be fed into the same set of question base. So one thing I like to do is to start with something light, like Reed Trevino is a golfer that I got my middle name after. And so I'll say, write a song about Lee Trevino in the style of, I don't know, Jay-Z. And right off the bat, it's fairly impressive that it will generate something pretty quickly. And obviously it's a joke, but interestingly, it sort of fits the rhyme pattern, the scheme, the syllable count, the verse pattern of Jay-Z's rap. And maybe more importantly, notice, look at these lyrics. It has a lot of detail about the British Open, the U.S. Open, sand traps, living legend, golfing pioneer. It knows who famous Mexican-American golfer Lee Trevino is. Now, again, obviously knows here is, we don't get into philosophical sense of does it know anything, because it is sort of like people say, a stochastic parrot. It doesn't really know things the way human brain knows things, but that's on a separate question for another day. Let's do another question here, like write a unity function to, I don't know, cause an object to vanish when it bumps into the player. And again, pretty decently, impressively, it tries to write a way to do it. Now, there's different ways you could write this function. And so if you're looking at this, obviously right off the bat, okay, we'll use the tag. It's not using collision layers. Should it use physics layers or so on? But it made some choices. It made some assumptions. And again, is that function usable? Probably within the right context. Now, part of what's also interesting about it is we can have some back and forth with it. I could say, can you use layers to make it only collide with the player and nothing else? And again, I just asked it that question. And now it's doing a layer check, name to layer check on player, instead of using the tag. You can give it this kind of feedback, right? So I can go back to my Lou Trevino question. I'll be like, cool. Now can you add mentions of, just for fun here, Michael Jordan, and also change the music style to country lyrics? And again, it's just going to start doing it, right? So we still have green, so it's still clearly including Lee Trevino from the previous question. Now it's including Michael Jordan can't match his swing. See some of those lyrics the same. MJ tried golf, couldn't compare. Lee Trevino's skills were just too rare. And I don't know, how much is this or isn't this country? I don't know. And we could say some things like, can you make this even more like country music? Involve some stereotypes from that style of song. And you can see now his Texas-born hat and boots, which, once again, this is the same thing I just asked a Unity question to, and it gave me some functional C#. We can tell it to stop generating. I think this one's got the point here. We open a new chat. Now, some other uses for it, right, is so soft skill things where I could be saying stuff to it like, I need to fire Jim. He hasn't been showing up at work. Please write me a professional email I can send him so he'll be gone by end of day, but the company won't be in trouble from how we phrase it. Dear Jim, writing to inform your employment at companies terminated effective immediately. Unfortunately, you noticed a pattern of absenteeism, missed deadlines. And once again, part of the fascinating thing about this is how general this is, that the same thing we just said this other question too about code, about joke lyrics, and that email I can say, can you please make this email shorter? And it shortened the email in case you're worried about it. Oh, it felt too wordy, right? Can you please add some humor to it? Notice it stopped us. It says it's not appropriate to add humor to a message about terminating someone's employment. It's giving me pushback. If I'd like to craft a different type of message, it'll offer to help. So again, it's got this layer of now it's trying to catch, you're asking me something I shouldn't be answering. Pretty interesting or advanced stuff. We ask another question here of, I don't know. Let's see. Write me a regex expression that will match for addresses, phone numbers, or email addresses. Now, if you've never written regex, you might not understand what's going on here, but if you have, it's a fairly impressive thing it's doing, where it threw this down, and then it's explaining to us why that is what it is. Now, again, maybe you can look at it and be like, okay, well, there's cases that this might not catch. This isn't perfect, but as a starting point, this knocked the socks off a Google search because, again, I can ask it for clarification. I can say, okay, please exclude phone numbers from the United States. And again, it just inferred this is about the previous question, and it took it a moment, processed it, came up with a suggestion, and there is our updated regex expression for a regular expression to match. So we've got that, and it's going to keep on explaining while excluding U.S. phone numbers. There you go. Now we could also ask it a question like, write me 10 sales headline ideas for a website about learning to play the sax. It'll give me 10 ideas. And part of this, the use of this process might be that we're not going to use these directly, but this can get us unstuck, right? So you have a partner now. You can kind of bounce some ideas off and say, okay, well, can we add some humor to those, right? I know we tried this with a firing message and it wouldn't do it for us, but here it's happy to try. Your neighbor's begging for mercy. It's not wrong. Is it great jokes? I don't know, but functionally, it's okay. Okay, let's see here. Pick the most effective 5 of those 10 options to narrow it down. Now, on what basis is it deciding effective? I don't know. But is it a better start than nothing? Maybe. If I failed to roll my 10 options, I've got it. Another thing we can do with it, right? We can say I've got a wordy text. Please help me make this text sound more professional and less wordy. Hi everyone, I'm Chris. I've been programming games since 1997. I'd like to show you some techniques to improve how you make games. These include programming, design, and project planning. And obviously it's kind of a run-on sentence. It's a little bit the way I tweet, but it's already trying to make this sound a little more professional. Great. Can you adjust that so that it's, easier for kids to understand? And it does it. And it changes the tone a little bit, spells things out a little further, which is like giving instructions to the computer. Not bad for what I gave it when I got back out of it. So anyway, I'm going to now close down my ChatGPT example. I just want to show you some of those things that it can do to talk through an example of where someone tried to use it in Home Team and then how we had to tweak why and how it's not quite doing everything people might imagine it's going to be able to replace. And by the way, you probably noticed, right, this is a very text generative, so it can generate some code, it can come up with functions, but this is not like the art image generator stuff. where we've kind of drawn a boundary around that is basically we don't want art straight from Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or whatever system is going directly into our games. But where we have it, some people just sort of exploring how does it fit into the process. Basically, if it's not displacing a team member because it's something that would have been a Google search anyway, because it's in a mood board as a part of communication among the team. It's in a Google slide about just something they're trying to refer to, like a style or perspective like this. Some members have been experimenting with, can they use it in their process there to, instead of doing a Google search for what they already knew was never going to be an image they authored, because they're trying to reference this style, this perspective. It's been a way that for some people they've been able to explore, okay, some tweaks on the colors, just to be people on the same page, to then use that to direct what is still hand-authored, handmade content in the games themselves. But when it comes to this kind of environment, though, where we're generating text for code, conceivably, code generated from it could be dropped in there just as much as we could from code you find in a Stack Overflow, code you find in an example tutorial online. And so an example where this came up the other day, we had a member, one of our project leads, working on a Star Fox style game. So, picture, maybe if you're not familiar with the old Star Fox, like SNES era, it's almost like a shoebox sliding forward constantly, and there's obstacles to dodge. And we don't even have bad guys, and this is just an obstacle dodging version of Star Fox. But the question that the lead posed to ChatGPT was to hide obstacles that were too far from the player's ship, or that were basically past the player's ship. The problem being that they were blocking the player's view of their ship from the camera as they got close to them. And so the code that was given back to them was a correct answer to that question, but the question wasn't necessarily phrased in the best way for knowing the constraints of the project, which, again, the AI really doesn't have any way to know. We don't yet have, at this point at least, some way to feed it the entire project for context in a way a human being understands the genre conventions. And so just, for example, if all we really need to do was just be able to tell, did I fly past a certain point? If all we're doing is sliding on an axis, again, you can picture this, even if you're not great at code. You can just do like a .x or .z comparison, less than, to tell, have I passed a certain distance behind the player's ship? Right? We're sliding one direction on a single axis. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Because what the AI offered instead was a distance check against the object affecting the renderer on it. Now, it didn't affect the collider. It literally just hid the object. It gave you a literal correct answer. The question was, how do I hide the object? Well, if this hides it, it still would have collided with things because it just turned off the renderer. Because it's based on a distance formula, instead of using a linear dimension or linear axis, where the player's ship is within the dodging space would affect whether or not that object was going to hide in a way that wasn't the intention of the person authoring it. There's also an easier solution that for our particular case actually worked fine, because all we really wanted was objects to vanish when they got behind the player's ship. The environment that this kind of Star Fox is taking place is in space. It's not like you're on a planet with a surface below you have to respect. So we literally was able to change the near clipping plane of the camera so that it didn't draw things that got closer. We figured out the distance from the camera to the ship, made the near clipping plane just a little behind the player's ship, and suddenly the problem went away without even any new scripts, just tuning a variable in the environment in a way that, again, ChatGPT was not going to lead us to that answer, just not how it currently fits into the process. And this is also where kind of, so zooming out, obviously, again, it can give you a specific answer to a question. One of the questions I asked the other day is kind of messing around, showing some people examples. If you ask it, I want an exercise routine, it'll give you some exercise ideas. And then you say, okay, well, I'm in a wheelchair. Can you adapt those? And to its credit, it does. And that's awesome. That's a really, really helpful thing to be able to say, I don't know, I've got a hurt back or I've got an ankle problem. What else could I try to do? And it'll give you some useful suggestions. But then you can also kind of take it to the absurd and say, okay, but if I'm living on the moon, how do I need to adjust my plan? And it'll just answer your question. It'll just tell you, well, in a low gravity environment, here's some things to consider about the weights and about whatever. And it's not wrong, but unlike a person, it will just answer whatever question you give it, right? And again, there's an exception here. If you can tell it used to let you add humor to a firing email. It's a fairly recent improvement that it catches and won't let you do that. For the most part, if you ask it a question, it's going to give you an answer. And whether or not you're giving it the right question with the right context is still hard to do. Had a conversation with one of my other home team members recently. He just ran a hackathon. He's also a pretty technical guy. And he was trying to figure out, are people going to be using this to kind of self-educate as part of their incorporating into their process of learning? And again, where we kind of see some examples where somebody is using it to try to generate some code, but the problem being the question that they're asking is not quite the right question. And it's really, really hard short of just having the experience, having the context, doing it hands-on to even tell what the other questions might be, to be able to see what the other answers might be. It's a classic, and sometimes this term is used derogatorily. It doesn't need to be, but it's a very real effect to what some people call the Dunningkruger effect, which the summary, right, is just very hard to self-assess what you don't know about something. If you knew what you didn't know, you would know it. And so sometimes that's part of the challenge that it's not yet great at. This is also where it's sort of zooming out, part of what it's doing to the space of this kind of work. An example I think we brought up at the end of the game AI workshop, and someone else had a question about this kind of effect on long-term employability of programmers and so on, is that really, at the current stage, it's more of an assistant than a senior level. It is, if you can tell it what problem to solve, it can solve the very narrow problem you've asked it. And you might even give it feedback and course correct and be like, that's not quite the right answer I needed. Make it a little more like this. What it's not yet suited for is at the higher level than that to figure out what are the problems worth solving. How do we attack those in what order? And so this is like already there was a lot of work that was even 15 years ago. When I was on Medal of Honor Airborne, we would talk about the fact that trees 1 through 5 get designed inside that studio in the United States by U.S. paid salary workers. Went through the training and structures and education frameworks that are available to people in this country. And then for trees 6 through 300, they would have someone else overseas who was a much lower cost per hour, living in a more affordable place in the world, didn't have as much degree training related to, say, aesthetic choices about why your 3D tree should look one way than the other. But if given one kind of tree, absolutely have the skill fluency in that engine or in that tool to crank out a lot of variations. And so this is where, again, at this stage of the AI, it is still the kind of work that honestly was largely being outsourced anyway. Was in many cases where companies could do it, already had someone else in the world doing it who was not solving the higher order problems of what's worth solving, how do we arrange those pieces and steps together. So there's a new course I've just made available on Udemy. It's my first course now in many years. My old previous course on Udemy were programming stuff. This is higher level. This is about how our project leads and home team plan out, okay, I got a big project idea. How do I take those ideas, break them into smaller actionable tasks over time so that if all I have is a few hours here and there each week, like a side project of any kind, all the work adds up and lines up. And this is something where, again, like AI is just not well suited to this kind of task yet. Really, those tasks are things we get the AI's help on. They might accelerate our ability to do it, but this is a kind of skill that is a human producer level thought. It's a different kind of process about why we're doing one kind of project and another. There's a whole section there about that process. There's a part in there about taking these different kind of project examples, which, by the way, aren't just games. It builds up to that, but it starts from if you're launching a YouTube channel, if you're making your own podcast, if you're just trying to get through a book or a course you've been trying to finish, ways of applying this kind of thinking to build up to more advanced projects. But it's about arranging those tasks so that you could use the energy of something like ChatGPT, or for that matter, heck, we've been doing this for 20 years now this way without AI generative help. Google searching, tools, tutorials, all that information is out there. But if you don't have a way to apply it to a project that adds up over time, things don't come together. Stuff doesn't come together by accident, right? You can't just tinker on something until it comes together. It needs to be having a purpose, a point, a plan, a release, a deadline. That's what the course is about. And again, it's at a layer of thinking that is different than what this AI generative stuff does. This AI generative stuff can tackle a very narrow problem handed to it. And this is about the next level of thinking above that, where we're orchestrating lots of tasks so they line up. Part of what has made this kind of technique so useful, I mean, for me, when it's how I do my video courses, how I generate my audiobooks, it's how I do a lot of my material. It's how I've led every single project in Home Team, before that in VGDev, before that a version of this we actually did back in Carnegie Mellon's Game Creation Society, starting back in 20 years ago. But part of what it's about is to stop you from wasting time by getting it so that the things that you do are related, coherent, add up to something more substantial. A lot of what's happening is that people get really passionate about something, they work really hard on something, but they don't have a plan. And the problem is that they think that if they could just code well enough or do good enough art or make good enough sound or whatever it is that AI might help them do better and faster, then they're going to have a bigger, better project. It's a different set of skills to get all the tasks to line up over time, to fit together, to achieve some purpose by a known date. So that's what this course is about. And again, it's a higher level of thinking. It'll help you still, whether or not you've got a tool at your disposal or do it all manually. You've been using it manually for 20 years before AI came along to help people do the very narrow tasks. But it's a next level of thinking about what are the components that we're trying to tackle, what are the tasks, the pieces, and it generalizes well beyond game development. So even though that's my main use case that I've helped hundreds and hundreds of teams apply this to, quite literally between VGDev and Home Team and GCS before that, it is very much, again, the same thing I use for my video courses. It's how I plan my Udemy course used by hundreds of thousands of people. It's how I plan my YouTube channel content back when this was a more common thing I kept doing. It's how I got my podcast off the ground. So the course covers some other examples with it to show you it's a much more general planning technique. But anyway, that's at Udemy. Check out the link in the description if you want to check it out. Newly launched. So if you want to get to it sooner rather than later, I would really appreciate your support as we're trying to get some initial traction going in there. But anyway, so that's it for the day. I just want to chat a bit about what's going on with ChatGPT stuff, what's going on with AI, show an example of it, talk a bit about what that might mean for the work that we're doing, how these things are going to affect some of our hard skill jobs, soft skill jobs, variety of creative things like you saw in there. Marketing could be used, email sending could be used, coding could be used. Right now, it's still at assistant level, but thinking about what else, where it might be going, how it's getting better, including, again, 4 is right around the corner. 4 is already in use under Bing and people who are paying for GPT. But still, what you'd like to be at a manager level. Thinking about what are the tasks we're doing, how do they fit together, how do they add up to something meaningful. That's your creation. That's you guiding and leveraging those tools to your advantage. That's kind of stuff my new Udemy course, Complete Every Project's about. Check it out in the description below. Oh, also want to add, the course includes, if you don't already have them from my other materials, self-command and self-doubt. Fully at the end of that course are hours of my audiobooks, includes the ebook transcripts if you'd rather read it. But those are my 2 audio courses about productivity. One's about how to follow through on a specific task you're trying to finish without getting sidetracked. The other's about how to take on new kinds of projects you've been shy about giving yourself a chance to start. For whatever reason, it's been uneasy for you. And those are both things I've helped people in Home Team for many years. I made audiobooks about those. Those are fully included at the end of the Udemy course down below. So it's not like a pitch to try to show you those separately. They come with the course because they're going to help you use those techniques and get better results, which is all I'm after. So aside from that, again, thanks for following along. Hope you'll enjoy all that material. Check out the link in the description. I look forward to hearing how you think the course helps out for what you're doing and what you're doing with it. Thanks, everybody. Catch you next time.